Hello, this is my video on channel Catfish USA farming history and status. Now, I had recorded this one earlier a few months ago and I had some problem with the quality of the sound. If you played the previous version, you would have heard there was a problem there. So I've taken the trouble to re-record this, and I've, of course, since I've had a little bit of time, I've made a few updates to my slides. So in any case, here we go. Channel Catfish, USA farming history and status. Catfish are the second most cultured species group behind carps, and as you can see from this table from the FAO, carps amounted to some 31.7 million metric tons in 2022, and catfishes, classified basically as all fishes that have barbels or around the mouth, was around 6.6 million metric tons. Now, of course, this includes the air-breathing catfishes from Asia and Africa. It includes the Pangasius from Asia, and it also includes the channel catfish from the United States. And then after catfish, we have cichlids. This is the group that includes tilapia. Let's just review a few of the farmed catfish of the world, starting out with Pangasiidae. We have Basa and Tra. These are the Vietnamese names. And Basa is Pangasius bocorti. This is the preferred cage farming species in Vietnam. And then we have Pangasianodon hypothalamus. This is Tra, the preferred species for farming in ponds. In Thailand, we've had a fish called Plasawai, and this has been called in English the striped river catfish. It has been identified for many years as a separate species, Pangasius suchai, but now recently it has been reabsorbed as part of Pangasianodon hypothalamus. We have pangas. These are on the Indian subcontinent and Myanmar. The species here is Pangasius pangasius, and these are fairly small fish. Then we have the giant Mekong River catfish, the Pangasianodon gigas, and in the lower right-hand corner, there's a picture of a man holding one of these fish. Now, this is not a full-size fish. If this fish was full-size, he would never be able to hold it. It could be 3 or 4 times the length and weighing several hundred kilograms. We also have the Clariidae, the African catfish, and also the Asian walking catfish. Here we have two species. We have Clarius macrocephalus and Clarius batrachus. What distinguishes the Clariidae is these are air-breathing catfish, so they are not dependent on oxygenation and they can be stocked at fairly high stocking densities. Now, they all have this long shape. And so if you go and look in the FAO databases, or for example, fish.j, these are all classified as torpedo-shaped catfish. And they're not that easy to tell apart, except if you look at the lower right there, we have pictures showing that there's a line that distinguishes the back of the skull from the beginning of the body, more or less back there at the pectoral fins. That's different. And then also the length and number of barbels around the mouth is also different for all of these species. Siluridae is the European catfish. There's really only one species here, Silurus glanus. It's also known as the Welsh catfish. It's native in the basins of the Baltic, Black, and Caspian Seas. And so looking at that map that I sourced from Wikipedia, red is representing the native occurrence, blue is the occurrence in coastal waters on the Baltic, Black, and Caspian Seas. And then in Western Europe, we also see that in some places it has been reintroduced. Moving on to the topic of this particular video, American catfish, we actually have 6 different species. This is from a website, um, and it's showing us 5 popular catfish species in the U.S. state of Georgia. So we have channel catfish. The picture is at the right-hand side there. Next one down, the blue catfish. And the next one down, flathead catfish. Now, flathead catfish is found in similar waters and similar watersheds compared with the others, but it is not a popular fish for culture, although it is a popular fish for sport fishing. We have the white catfish. This one is a relatively small species, and it's not particularly interesting for aquaculture. And then we have 2 species of bullhead catfish, and I will explain those in a moment. The family of the American catfish is that we see mainly farmed is the Ictaluridae. So we have the channel catfish. It's USA mainly, but now grown in multiple countries. I'll show you that in a minute. Blue catfish, Ictalurus furcatus. And this is a picture on the right-hand side of a very blue fish taken from presumably an aquarium in the state of Florida. And then once again, down at the bottom, we have the flathead catfish. The native ranges of American catfish are shown in these various graphics. So we have channel catfish, flathead catfish, and the black bullhead catfish on the right. The other bullhead catfish is the yellow bullhead shown on the lower right. And then we have along the bottom the blue catfish and the white catfish. Now, the reason the catfish are all on that side of the United States is because we have the mountains running down through the state of Washington, down through along the west coast, and then everything that is on the west side of that, of course, the water will all flow to the Pacific. And then on the other side of the mountain range, the water will all flow to the Atlantic. The Mississippi River, we have the upper Mississippi River Basin and the lower Mississippi River Basin. They're shown in purple and light purple, and then also in yellow. And feeding into the Mississippi, we have the Missouri River Basin, very large basin running through most of the agricultural states of America. We have the Arkansas River and the White River Basin. We have the Red River Basin down there along the boundary of Texas. And then we have the Ohio River Basin off in the northeast. Now, you may recall last couple of years there was some kind of an industrial accident where a train had an accident and then it's was delivering chemicals, and those chemicals spilled into the waterway in Pennsylvania, and they were very concerned that those chemicals would end up going downstream and ending up in the Mississippi River watershed. In July 2025, the American Feed Industry Association published this report called Animal Feed Consumption. And in this report, they broke down the feed production of every state in the United States. And it was broken down by major species. And we do have information they provided us for aquaculture. The report not only goes into feed production by state, but also goes into by species or by group, all of the feed ingredient use, state by state, and then also individual ingredients, quite an extensive list, and their use in every single state. But what I wanted to show you here was this table. In July 2025, the American Feed Industry Association brought out this report called Animal Feed Consumption. And in this report, they broke down the feed production of every state in the United States according to major farmed species, including horses and rabbits. And anyway, we also have aquaculture in the report. And this map is showing us the aquaculture feed consumption of every American state. And by far the largest consumption in the United States, if you're looking at this little graphic down here, is Mississippi with 254,000 metric tons, followed by Alabama with about 104,000 metric tons. And then we have Arkansas, nearly 30,000 metric tons, and Texas, 17,000 metric tons, all for production of channel catfish. Now, the other main area where we have aquaculture in America, and that is up here in Idaho, where they're reporting about 20.2 thousand short tons. I did not convert that to metric tons. In any case, that's the main area where rainbow trout are produced in the United States. Now, coming back and looking at our map here, we see that we have this area, the lower river of the Mississippi, and inside that little circle right there, this is where the majority of the catfish farming is going on, the highest concentration in this large river basin. And you can see there over here that along this side right here, there's an escarpment. It's really kind of looks more like a bluff. It's not actually very high. It's only around 100 feet, 30 meters or so. But it runs all along there. And so as it's running along there, basically it means that you see all of the water shed is starting at below there. And so that's really the limitation on the east for the catfish farming area away from the lower Mississippi River Delta. Now, I was curious about the international status of channel catfish aquaculture. And so I went to FishBase, and there's the QR code. You can go and see this table for yourself, showing many different countries in Africa. It says in table 1 there on the left, present in 26 countries. And introduced in almost all. Native, we see only 3. North America, and that's Canada, Mexico, and in the United States. All of the rest of the area was introduced. Now, on the other side, we have Table 4, reported from 33 countries and islands. There we see in Asia, China, and also Thailand. It says not established, but these are areas where channel catfish has been introduced for aquaculture. So it's not existing in the wild, but it has been introduced. And as it turns out, that the channel catfish, of course, is a very large production in China. The blue catfish, Ictalurus furcatus, has not been distributed anywhere else, and so it remains native only to the United States and Mexico. I went to fish.j database. This is the FAO database, and I've shown places where you can find this in the past. I was looking at world channel catfish production, and it turned out that there were really only 3 countries that were noted for production. China at 440,000 tons in 2023, and the United States at 160,000 tons in 2023, and Mexico basically barely in the game. But total worldwide production then coming out at around 602,000 tons. We saw Fish.J talking about China, so I was very curious, and I went to DeepSeek, which is the AI that the Chinese researchers released at the beginning of 2025. And I asked it for information. So it gave me this. The key provinces for channel catfish production in China are Guangdong, Hubei, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Sichuan, and Guangxi provinces. And it gives you a little bit of information there. And I've got a map showing you where those provinces are located. And China has some very large, very long rivers, and then there's lots of aquaculture activity in and around those rivers and some canals. Further looking at this paper called Channel Catfish in China, Historical Aspects, Current Status and Problems. This was written by Zong and others in 2016. There's the QR code. It's not free. That's I've got it marked there in the year marked there in red, so it's not free. But if you have institutional access, you can go and find that and read it for yourself if this is interesting. So it told us that channel catfish were introduced to China from California in 1984. Initially, there were many small-scale hatcheries, but now there are primarily 2 large companies that produce most of the fingerlings. So they have large-scale production, then they have genetic programs, and they have distribution networks, and so on. And then China began to export frozen channel catfish fillets to the United States in 2003. And that's about the same time as the United States began to block importation of Pangasius fillets from Vietnam. So I have some information from that coming up soon. Chinese production exceeded 100,000 metric tons in 2005, and then 200,000 metric tons in 2007. And a few slides in here, I will have some information showing you how much is being imported into the United States. But looking at this, you can see that the export volume in terms of metric tons in 2014 was somewhere around 100,000 metric tons. Let's move on now, specifically looking at the United States. This is a very interesting review that I'm pulling this information from. Annual Review of Animal Biosciences, Catfish Biology and Farming by Rex Dunham and Ahmed El Aswad. And so various places here I'm going to be presenting some of the information I find from this document. There it is, the QR code. You can go and find it. So the first known spawning of channel catfish in the United States was reported as far back as 1892, and the Kansas State Fish Hatchery started propagating channel catfish in 1910. Recreational fishing for channel catfish is an important sport fishery. So in those early days, hatcheries were producing the bullhead catfish for recreational fishing, and then channel catfish was there also. But then, as we began to realize the commercial value of farming channel catfish as a food fish, the first farms for channel catfish were established in the state of Alabama in the early 1960s. This is from another paper. You can see there economically important production relationships in channel catfish food fish production. The years along the bottom from 1970 to 2010. We have on the left-hand graph the round weights processed in 1,000 metric tons and sales in millions of dollars as the dotted line. And so we basically were reaching somewhere upwards of 250, nearly 300,000 metric tons at around 2002, 2003. And then it began to drop down. This on the right hand side, data from the USDA 2005, but it's in this report that I've shown you up there. Most of the farming of catfish in these four important states was in ponds, a small amount in a couple of those areas in raceways, tanks, a small amount in tanks, and then cages in ponds. Now that has changed somewhat, and I'll be mentioning that in a few minutes. Here's another paper, Economic History of U.S. Catfish Farming, Lessons for Growth and Development of Aquaculture. Farmed catfish had competition from wild-caught catfish, various species from U.S. rivers and lakes. And then we also had imported catfish, wild-caught species from Brazil and Mexico. So the wild-caught catfish, those would basically be recreational catfish for the most part. People would catch them, and if they're catching them for their own consumption, then they're not going to be buying farmed catfish. On the right-hand side, we have the price paid to farmers in the square dots down at the bottom. Over time, from 1974 to 2019, the real price paid to farmers has dropped. This is adjusted for inflation. And we also see on the left-hand side that the production costs have also dropped. But if they're adjusted for inflation, that is the bottom line. And so costs have been coming down, but prices have been coming down as well. The arrival of Pangasius catfish from Vietnam undercut the price of U.S. farmed raised catfish, and then with prices as much as 66% lower than U.S. catfish. At least that's what this article from Engel, Hansen, and Kumar talks about. Eventually, the American catfish farmers complained, and eventually anti-dumping tariffs were imposed on Vietnamese exporters in 2002, which forced Vietnam to essentially stop marketing and selling their catfish products in the United States. Now, these anti-dumping tariffs, and you can see there I say 37% to 64%, these would be company specific. So the US government would go to each of the importers, who are you buying from? They would then go to Vietnam. They might inspect facilities. They would ask for details about costs, costs of feed, costs of farming, costs of processing, and then compare that with the price at which the exporter was selling the fish. And if they thought that the exporter was selling fish very, very cheaply, they might slap a 60% tariff on them. And if they were selling at a higher production cost relatively, they would maybe charge them only 37 to 40%. But one other thing that happened was that at about the same time, legal action also stopped the Vietnamese from calling their product catfish. So this became reserved for only American-grown catfish. And this is when the Vietnamese started calling their product Tra and Basa. So I mentioned those earlier. Those are the two names. On the lower right left, you see the U.S. catfish production peaking at around 2001, 2003, when then falling down to approximately um, uh, half of that. And then if we look on the right-hand side, we see Pangasius imports from Vietnam. So they started at around 2005, 2007. And then that was really about the time. Then they weren't able to sell them as call them catfish anymore. Nevertheless, because they are a white flesh fish that you can cook in many different ways, and it's good for things like fish sticks and fish burgers and so on. There's still demand for that as a low-cost fish. Now, the average FCR reported by catfish farmers in 2010 was 2.1, and that range was from about 1.9 to 2.4, depending on farm size. And I'm not quite sure how the farm size is related to that, but I suppose different farms have different feeding methods, from either feeding with blowers, maybe feeding from uh, trucks that have blowers. In some cases, they might have had like track-mounted blowers. And I do remember years ago seeing photographs of farmers feeding their catfish ponds with crop spraying planes. Engel in 2007 estimated that feed cost was 45 to 47% of the total variable cost, and 33 to 36% of the total cost for catfish production. Now, one of the reasons that this cost seems to be quite low compared here to Asia is that in America, uh, not just equipment costs and utility costs, but also labor costs are quite high. So for growing catfish in Thailand, the cost of feed for total variable cost might end up being around 60%. And that has to do with the fact that labor in Asia is much cheaper. Looking at this graphic on the right, U.S. catfish feed, 32% protein, and prices are in dollars per metric ton. The prices were fairly stable, and then somewhere around 2008, we actually had a problem with the very expensive oil at that time. Oil went up to about $144 a barrel. Fish meal went up very high, and then that caused that spike there in the price of feed. Of course, spurring feed producers to start reducing fish meal and bringing their uh, plant ingredients up in the formulations. Nevertheless, you see that the prices have reached up to $500 a ton, and some feed prices got even higher than that. I have some information about that coming from a recent source, and the prices are very, very high. Engel and her colleagues said that the golden era of catfish in the United States was from the mid-1970s to about the year 2000. Catfish nutrition research was well funded and grew rapidly along with the industry. And after my professor, Dr. John Halver, developed the techniques for determining amino acid requirements and vitamin requirements for rainbow trout and a couple of species of Pacific salmon, these techniques were introduced into the catfish nutrition research. And most of the nutrition research came from Auburn University, from Dr. Tom Lovell's laboratory. And we also had Dr. Robert Wilson at Mississippi State University, who did a lot of work on amino acids. We also then had at Mississippi State another researcher, Randy Robinette. And during this period, papers were published reporting vitamin requirements, mineral requirements, amino acid requirements, lipid nutrition, carbohydrate, and energy requirements, relationships between nutrition and immunity, and then also researching feed ingredients started. Other notable nutrition researchers during this period included Dr. Delbert Gatlin, Dr. Carl Webster, and Dr. Chorn Lim, recently deceased, Dr. James Tidwell, Dr. Robert Stickney, who was a member of my PhD committee, and then Dr. Robert Ray. Now, I have met, because of my close association with Dr. Halver, I had actually met a number of these. Probably the only one that I have not met is Dr. Robert Ray. So let's carry on with our story. So on the practical side, so we have Kansas State University starting from 1959, a researcher there, Dr. Otto Thiemeyer, and then he was joined later in 1963 by Dr. Charles Deyo. They worked on ways to improve the growth rates and productivity of catfish ponds. And they had lots of students going through their program in that period of time. They together tested 78 different experimental feeds and they published this report, 36 pages, summarizing their work in 1980. So there's the QR code. Channel catfish, produced in Kansas ponds for profit and pleasure. On the right-hand side, I've given you not the complete contents of this report, but a very significant part, and you can see some of the things, basically how to look at the biology of channel catfish, how to age them, how to measure their lengths, weights, something about the hatcheries, how to feed them, formulating feeds, and then they were looking at feeding fry. They were talking about, protein sources in the feeds, feed additives, vitamins, byproducts, feeding rates, floating and sinking, whether pelleted or extruded. And then they looked at a bunch of other things. So actually, this is quite an interesting report. And if you then see here, this was their research with catfish feeds containing 30% curd protein. This is not, I presume, not a complete list. But we see a number of feed formulations here and a list of ingredients, and they were testing all different kinds of ingredients that were available as agricultural byproducts in the United States: soybean, alfalfa, peanuts, wheat bran, corn, sorghum, distillers dried solubles, and then some animal proteins, fish meal, meat and bone meal, feather meal, and so on. And some of those same diets that you see across the top, then down in the lower table, are showing their protein content, survival from those feeds, and then weight gain and also feed conversions. And so this was actually very useful. Now, in the thing about the channel catfish industry is, for the most part, feed formulations were open. That is, you had feed mills were parts of cooperatives with farmers. The researchers at the universities would publish their research information, and they would be doing consulting with the cooperatives, and the formulas were kept quite up to date. When new ingredients were interesting or useful, they might be recommended, and these formulas would be adjusted and so on. Okay, moving past the golden era to the decline of catfish farming in the US. This page is quite a lot of text here. This is taken from the Alabama extension. There's the QR code that will take you to the page at the link you see down at the bottom. So the decline in catfish prices came amid high feed prices. So we have high feed prices and we have declining catfish prices. And then you see this is from 2023. So this is a very recent report published in 2024. So it mentions that in 2023 in Alabama, that the feed cost from January to August was $532 per ton, and for up to $563 a ton for 32% protein. So this is quite expensive, and representing a very significant increase compared even over the last few years, as they state here. And then despite high feed prices, catfish feed delivered for food, fingerlings, and broodstock was, 463,000 short tons in 2023. I won't read that second paragraph, but it goes into some of the other problems, labor shortages, inventory management, bird predation, and so on, that are piled on top of competition from imports, which makes it very difficult for the farmers. And on that page, we have this graph showing the average monthly price of premium sized catfish. So this is harvest size in US dollars per pound. And we have 2022 is the upper blue line, and 2023 is the orange line. And you have a price of less than $1.20 per pound, which basically is probably not a price that you can sell and make money. Now, Pangasius is still being imported into the United States, but it's not being called catfish, as I explained earlier. So it's sold as tra, basa, sawai, which is actually coming from the Thai name plasawai. And then also it can be called striped catfish, or sometimes maybe striped river catfish. And this graphic from the same page actually is the previous from Alabama, showing U.S. frozen fillets here in the dark blue, fresh fillets in the light blue, and then the orange, the dark orange, is showing imported frozen fillets from Vietnam. It looks like at one point or another they might have tried to do some fresh, but that was just probably the logistics and so on, and the expenses of moving fresh was just not worth the effort. Now, where does all of this go? Well, you might not necessarily know where it's going. It's coming primarily into the food service sector, so it could be coming into restaurants, it can be coming into processing plants, it might be turned into fish sticks or fish burgers or whatever, and you wouldn't necessarily know that this is still coming into the United States. Let's look at some of the factors, current status, that the farming industry is trying to do in order to make themselves more competitive and more profitable. One key issue has been intensification. So they went from very large static ponds, and this is data from this paper by Hegde from 2022, that farm size averaged around 221 hectares, and average pond size was 4 or 5 hectares. And then the pond sizes have been coming down. They've been moving to split ponds, and this graphic then is showing us intensive aeration, because oxygen is the key water quality parameter that guarantees you growth. And as you increase stocking densities, it becomes more and more important. The onset of split ponds, and I'll show you a picture of a split pond in a second or two. And then we have not very popular, but this development of in-pond raceways. It just has not really caught on. Even here in Asia, we're using in-pond raceways for tilapia, and it seems like it's an investment that is really hard to pay back. So I mentioned split ponds. So this is a information coming from another paper by Technological Progress in the U.S. Catfish Industry from 2022 on the right-hand side, showing the use of aeration in traditional systems, and then channel catfish production specifically, hybrid catfish production, split pond systems, and intensively aerated systems. So these numbers then have come up, reported as kilowatts of aeration equipment per hectare. Now, split pond farming is an interesting idea, and this is a picture showing a split pond beside two normal ponds. And Dr. Ganesh Kumar, who's written a lot of these reports, especially with Carol Engel, says here that split pond technology compartmentalized traditional open ponds into a smaller fish rearing basin, occupying about 20% of the pond, and a larger waste treatment basin occupying the remaining 80%. So actually, whereas in this pond, the catfish is grown on in the entire pond, in this one, the catfish are just up here in the top, and this remainder of the pond is for water treatment. So the water is exchanged and circulated back and forth through that. And then you have intensive aeration in the actual area where the catfish are located. More current developments, focusing on ways to reduce production costs through genetic improvement programs for existing channel catfish strains. And then a lot of emphasis on development of fast-growing hybrids, so channel catfish crossed with blue catfish. And then also more alternative feed ingredients research, and research emphasizing feed protein reduction. Well, I'm going to talk about that in another part of this series on channel catfish. An interesting paper you can go and read. There's actually a paper by Masser and Dunham from by the basically the same authors from 1998. And then this was revised, and that's this paper here in 2012. The information is more or less the same. It's just that they've updated it a little bit, more up-to-date information about feeds and ponds, and some of the characteristics of the hybrid catfish. They give us then this information that crossing channel catfish females with blue catfish males produces the best hybrids, and that the opposite cross does not perform nearly as well. Now, of course, there are lots of strains of purebred channel catfish that they can choose to use, and maybe a number of different strains of blue catfish. But it's very important that you have stocks, brood stocks of both of those species, and then you use them to cross to produce F1 hybrids, or in other words, the first generation after the spawn. In many cases, if you take those F1 hybrids and you try to produce F2 hybrids or so on, many of them do not perform very well. So Masser and Dunham, um, uh, then they provide this list of the benefits of using the hybrids compared with most commercial strains of pure channel catfish. Faster growth, 10 to 30% better. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means faster turnover. It means lower energy cost, lower labor cost, lower period when you're buying a lot of feed. For ponds, you have better feed conversion. You have higher tolerance to low dissolved oxygen, which is maybe means that you can um, uh, have a little less sensitivity and investment in your aeration system, increased resistance to many diseases, and then we have better tolerance to high stocking densities in ponds. Closely related to that is more uniformity in size and shape. We know that in fish that are highly sensitive to stocking density, sometimes you get fish that have quite aggressive behaviors, and other fish that are not aggressive, and so then you end up with uneven feed intake, and then you end up with non-uniform size. Finally, on our list here, higher dress out percentages and increased harvestability by seining. So once again, carrying on with this report, they talk about how important these hybrids are, and because the blue catfish and the channel catfish, they may be in overlapping waters, but they have kind of different environmental niches. They're different in size. While their gametes are in fact compatible, they don't normally interspawn because of their separation in the environment. So normally you're going to use hatcheries to keep these two types of fish as broodstock, and you're going to extract the eggs and sperm and fertilize them and then grow them up to fingerlings. And this basically just gives you the information about what kind of hybrids work and what doesn't seem to work. The current status is that in the United States, in the period of 2023 to 2025, U.S. catfish farms have been reportedly farming only 20 to 30% purebred channel catfish, and 70 to 80% now are F1 hybrids. And the shift to hybrids is most pronounced in the major producing states: Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and they have Louisiana. And then also adopting the hybrids then, of course, has improved the efficiency, the yields, and the profitability of U.S. catfish aquaculture. I'm just wrapping up here. This is some data published by the United States Department of Agriculture. They have these catfish production reports that come out twice yearly in July and February. This one came out in February. There is one that has been released since that I'm not showing you here. But they're comparing the data from 2023 to 2025, data for 2024 in terms of acreage. So this is number of acres, number of ponds, and the food size fish in how many fingerlings and broodstock, and then ponds that are being modified, and then also ponds that are being fallowed at the moment. So this gives us an idea of the situation. So this report, you can go there to that QR code, you'll get this one, but actually it's a download page where you can go and download even the most recent ones. In this paper, we're talking about new farming technologies and the economics of U.S. catfish farming. What we see across the top here is different farming methods. So we see multiple batch, that is growing multiple age classes in a pond, single age class, a multiple age class, but at a higher stocking density, and then intensive aeration. That's for normal channel catfish, and then we have for the hybrids over here. Noting that the survival of the hybrids is quite a bit better. So we have hybrids here, survival is 78 to 81%, where the survival of the uh, regular catfish is in the range here showing between 55 and 70. So that's a 10 or 15% increase in survival. And of course, that's um, money in the bank when you can harvest more fish out of the pond. And the FCRs, as we show here, are not significantly different, but they have faster growth and more uh, more benefits for the farmers. So that's why the majority of the farmers have shifted over to growing hybrids. Okay, as always, I like to give you some sources where you can go and find some information if you want to follow up more detail. So these are resources relating to history and channel catfish farming. So the first one I mentioned to you, I showed it to you already, this Catfish Biology and Farming, very interesting report, quite long, worth reading. Another paper there, Historical Trends in Ictalurus Catfish Commercial Harvest in the Upper Mississippi River. That's from 2011. And then there's a book here, Biology and Culture of Channel Catfish, published by Elsevier, edited by Craig Tucker and John Hargreaves. Uh, this was printed in 2004, so it covers up until about then. It's probably confined in a library. I could not find any place where it was available as a free to read or download and so on. Some other papers, economic history, I've gave you that previously. All of these I showed you. Now, I did want to mention one thing. So at the bottom on the left there, we have PhD dissertation. So uh, we saw Hegde had published a couple of scientific papers. But I like to look at their PhD dissertations if they're available, because quite often in a PhD dissertation, it's not so much different than a peer review process, because you have some top professors who are supervising the student. And then when they write these dissertations, they write them complete. They have all their data. They do all the analysis and everything that they want to show. And whereas if you go and read the scientific papers, quite often there are page limits, word limits, maybe restrictions on which data they can show. So they make smaller tables. And sometimes if a student is dedicated, they might actually take one PhD dissertation and publish 2 or 3 papers. But nevertheless, I really like going and looking at their dissertations, because you get it all in one place. And then we have on the right-hand side here another PhD dissertation by Karen Sanaga. Um, and there's a QR code published in 2016. Uh, Her dissertation, it's quite long. It's a couple of 100 pages. Called Tasteless, Cheap, and Southern, The Rise and Decline of the Farm-Raised Catfish Industry. And her core premise is that they standardized channel catfish to the point where they just had, white fillets, or maybe steaks, but let's say fillets. And they were really indistinguishable from the Pangasius and some other low-cost fish. And so I wouldn't necessarily say tasteless, but it's very mild flavored, very mild taste. And chefs like these because they pick up the flavor of anything that they're cooked with. Uh, So this one, it's an interesting dissertation going into a lot of detail about all of the issues relating to the decline of the farm-raised catfish industry, and she's really focusing a lot on local American consumers and the issues of imports and competition. So I think that would be an interesting read. I certainly found it interesting. So I have come to a close. This I just mentioned is a map taken from Google Earth. I just basically searched for catfish farms in the United States, and I just was it, Google Earth gave me a list of certain sites, and so I was looking there, and I just saw this one. Okay, it says America's catfish farms, but just look at the breadth and size of that farming area with all of those ponds. It looks like there's a number of small ponds and some smaller. It's hard to tell whether they're doing any split ponds there. Um, but anyway, this just shows you the intensity of catfish ponds. And these ponds are all, some of them could be actually, in fact, quite large. Here you're seeing me on YouTube, but I'm also available on X. You can find me as Fish Nutrition Expert there. I'm on LinkedIn as Thomas Wilson. Although if you search for Fish Nutrition Expert, it'll probably show up. And Apple Podcasts is something I'm not doing right now, but I intend to do that. So there we are. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. It would help my channel to grow. And like my videos, comment on my videos, please, especially if you have some other information or if you've got a question you'd like to ask. I can help direct you to find the answer to that. Turn on notifications. I have plans to put a lot of videos up. Currently, there's a series I'm working on in terms of feed ingredients. And at some point or another, I'm going to start moving on into human health and nutrition in relating to exercise. And if you're a student in particular, please share my video with your friends and associates, and that will help me to share this information on a much wider basis. So thank you very much for watching, and I appreciate everything that you're doing here, and I want to continue to make videos for people just like you.